On this week's episode, I'm talking about the Robocop series, and to be honest with you, I wasn't quite sure which genre to place this one in, because let's face it, the continuity is part sci-fi, part action, and all messed up. The saga of Robo began in 1987, and after some setup with this world's TV footage, we meet Murphy, who starts a new job in a troubled Detroit police station. He gets a new partner named Lewis, and then we meet corporate guys Dick, Bob, the Old Man, and of course, Ed. 209 to be exact. Unfortunately, on Murphy's first day, he comes across Red with a side order of Leland Palmer, and gets blown to smithereens. He is recovered and handed over to the Robocop program, which shows a new year, so we extend into the next year. Then the police precinct has a 1986 calendar up on their wall, so it's possible to assume that this is an alternate 1986, where things have advanced differently than our time, which would explain the clearly 1980s TVs and hairstyles, or we can just dismiss this as an old calendar somebody had up on the wall, which doesn't make a ton of sense because next, this store is selling comics that clearly came out in the 1980s. I'm going full geek here to tell you that they stopped making ROM comics in 1986, and this Vision and Scarlet Witch miniseries ran from 85 to 86, so it is definitely looking like we're in 86 here, with the beginning part of the movie taking place in 85, only in alternate timeline versions of these dates. Anyway, Robo gets to work and shoots dicks. Ooh. And starts piecing together his former identity, and he takes family photos with Polaroids, so yeah, 80s. And this seems like a good place to mention that there's an official novelization of the film that places the date of the film as 2043 and 44, but I only use outside material if there's no in-movie evidence, and we have that here with the calendar and the comic books, so I ignore that. Bob gets cashed out, and when Robo uncovers corruption, he's set up as the bad guy and has to face off against Ed 209, who is conquered by his greatest enemy, stairs. Everything leads to a final face-off with film's second most drawn-out and overly cruel death scene ever. I'm looking at you, Jurassic World. All the villains get wiped out, including Clarence, and Robo takes out Ed before finishing off head corporate sleaze Dick Jones, whose arms magically get really, really long here. And then Robo walks off, back on the beat. 3 years later, in 1990, after a media break, we get the return of Robo in Robocop 2, which introduces a new street drug called Nuke, new villains Kane and the Kid, and it turns out that OCP is trying to create Robocop 2, which gives the movie its title, which is actually pretty clever. Murphy, who is sporting a bluer tint now, gets trashed, but gets rebuilt in time to, oh hey, Frank Miller. He's crazy now. Anyway, Robo takes down Francis Dollarhide, and oh hey, it's a lot of vagina. Kane's brain gets removed and put inside of a monstrous body, like some sort of Frankenstein, except one who doesn't say bogus, and instead kills all his old friends. The Old Man reveals his plans to build an entirely new Detroit right over the old one, and says that they gave the city Robocop about 1 year ago, placing this one in alternate timeline 1987, and then reveals Robocop 2 to the press, but its drug addiction causes it to go nuts. The two robots fight, causing tons of destruction, until they just give it the drugs, and then two action figures duke it out. Clearly two action figures. And Murphy yanks Kane's brain out. The Old Man comes out clean, and Murphy continues his fight. 3 years passed, and in 1993 we get the conclusion of the trilogy with Robocop 3, and Media Break once again tells us that OCP is being bought out, and new rehab cops basically driving out the citizens of Old Detroit to build a new Delta City. And Milton's here, as is CCH Pounder. Seriously, CCH Pounder is like the best name that anyone could have. Ed 209 is back, Jeff Garlin pops up for a second along with the Eternal Flame, and if you get that reference, you are my new best friend. Lewis is back, and then the amazing Jeffrey Franken pops up, and when Robo finally appears, he's back to his original color scheme, thank goodness, but he sounds kinda different. Rip Torn is the new head of OCP, and the Old Man is gone, but Johnson's still here. And then when we see Murphy's face, it's a lot less buckaroo, and a lot more this guy. In a face-off with rehab officers, Lewis gets gunned down, and we meet Japanese Robocop, who's a bit of an upgrade, and then Murphy gets a flamethrower arm. A quick flash of these explosive rounds show that they were packed in December of '86, so there's more evidence that this series is not in some far future, but an alternate version of current times. Robo then takes the time to shoot his shape out of a door and walk through it, but I mean, look at it, it's like plywood. Why didn't he just walk through it? The rebels all get wiped out, and then there's some torn posters for NWA's 100 Miles and Running, which came out in 1990. So there's definitely been some time between Part 2 and 3, enough time for the old man to be out of OCP and a new regime to step in and start implementing the Delta City plan, and it's definitely post-1990, so we're going to roll with the year that the film was shot in, which was 1991, only, again, alternate universe 1991 in which there's a Robocop and stuff. Robocop takes on Domocop while the police face off against the rehab officers, and Otomo gets blown up. Murphy straps on a jetpack to save the day, but it turns out that there's multiple Otomo models, and they get hacked by a little girl and kill each other, and our heroes fly off while the main villain gets blown up. Rip gets fired, and the head of the Japanese corporation bows, because that's what stereotypes do. And Robo keeps the fight going, and it's hard to believe that this one is from the guy that brought us Night of the Creeps and Monster Squad. 1 year later, in 1994, Robocop showed up on the small screen in Robocop the series, which featured a new actor in the suit and ignores the events of Part 2 and 3, and takes place a few years after the first movie. It ran for one season and was then followed in 2001 by Robocop Prime Directives, a 4-episode miniseries that takes place 13 years after the first film, and again ignores the sequels. There's also a tombstone in the show that depicts Murphy's death as occurring in 1990, but the show is not really canon, so we're setting that aside. There were also 2 animated series that filled the gap after the films were no longer being made, plus several comic book series, including a really fantastic Robocop vs. Terminator series written by Frank Miller, before he went crazy. Then, in 2014, the eventual sequel happened, rebooting the continuity. Although there's no media break, there is just a Novak element with that Snakes on a Plane guy. There's Ed 209's and Rorschach, and this little kid's date of birth is listed as 2023, so we're somewhere in the late 2020s. And there's these drone guys called EM-208s. We also meet New Murphy and New Lewis, who's a different race and gender, and also he's freaking Omar. Bruce Wayne shows up as the head of Omnicorp, and then our guy Jay shows us this chart of projections that start at 2030, so we're officially dated somewhere between 2023 and 2030, and that kid could have been 7, so 2030 seems likely. And damn, Gary Oldman's in this too? That's a solid lineup of talent for a kind of bland remake. When they show candidates for the Robocop prototype, all of the candidates have files up until 2028, so that seems pretty conclusive that that's our date here, and then Murphy gets blowed up. We see him wake up in the robo-suit in classic colors, and he has full memories, and one real hand, and funky visor. And we soon see just how much of Alex is actually left, and is the hand really necessary? This is why they said to lose the arm in the original, I guess, because it looks just kind of silly. Robo's computer search confirms the 2028 date, and there's a nod to the old suit, but they decide to paint him black. And then there's some interesting bits as Robo's combat is actually computer-driven, but Murphy is actually made to think that he's controlling his actions, giving him the illusion of free will. And then finally, about an hour and 5 minutes in, Robocop goes on the streets to be a cop. When Omnicorp decides to eliminate Robo and focus on their drone program, he fights back, taking on a couple of Eds, and getting pretty lumped up. Directive 4 seems to still exist, but Lewis doesn't have one of those. There's a face-off with Birdman on the roof, and Alex breaks his programming to shoot him, and I don't know, just kind of over, I guess. They rebuild him in silver because black was kind of dumb, and that was it since really no one went to see this movie. So there you have it, 4 movies, a couple TV shows, comic books, all that kind of good stuff. Continuity, I guess, kind of makes sense. It mostly makes sense. It's a pretty disjointed film series, mainly just because quality level is all over the charts. The first one is a phenomenal classic that you've got to check out. It is a fantastic film to watch. that's about it for this week. Hope you enjoyed this episode. It is a sci-fi timeline. It could have been action, but we'll go with sci-fi. Let me know what you thought of down below, and let me know what else you want to see. Next video coming up will be the results of the voting, so you will enjoy that and see which movie franchise won. But I think if you go look at the voting, it's pretty obvious what the winner will be. So until then, I'll see you next time. Also, Patreon stuff, I can't not include those. These wonderful people who have been helping me out, and you can also do so by going to this link down below. And until then, I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.